The night was quiet, too quiet. Amara Lewis eased her grip on the steering wheel, her sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit streets of Houston's residential district. The city had changed over the years, new developments, new businesses, but some things never changed. She wasn't here as Director Lewis, the newly appointed leader of the Texas Department of Law Enforcement. Tonight she was just another black woman driving alone. And that was exactly the point. No security detail, no official vehicle, no badge on display, because the only way to see the truth was to live it. Her rental car rolled past rows of suburban houses, her GPS softly humming directions. Then flashing red and blue lights flooded the rearview mirror. A patrol car. No siren. No warning. Amara's jaw tightened slightly. She had done nothing wrong. Yet still she was being stopped. Her fingers hovered over her phone, but she didn't reach for it, not yet. Instead, she took a steady breath, watching in the mirror as the officer stepped out of his vehicle. Tall, white, confident. She didn't need a name to know exactly who he was. But when he reached her window, the badge confirmed it. Officer Knox. And now the game began. Amara Lewis rolled down her window, keeping her hands visible on the steering wheel. The cool night air drifted in, but the tension was immediate. Officer Knox took his time approaching the vehicle like a man who had done this 1,000 times before. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed. That slow, arrogant strut, the kind that said he wasn't here to protect or serve. He was here to assert dominance. Amara had seen his type before. Men like Knox didn't need a reason. They just needed an opportunity. He stopped at her window, resting one hand on his holster, the other reaching for his flashlight. No greeting. No standard procedure, just one demand: license and registration, no reason given. No explanation. Amara tilted her head slightly. She wasn't playing this game. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her tone even, unreadable. Knox let out a low, condescending chuckle. "You tell me." His flashlight swept across her face, then down to her lap, then to the interior of the car, looking for something, looking for an excuse. Amara didn't blink. "Why did you stop me?" she asked. Knox smirked. "You look suspicious." She could have laughed, because there it was, the oldest excuse in the book. No traffic violation, no speeding, no broken taillight, just existing while black. Amara kept her expression neutral, even as her mind sharpened. She knew exactly how these stops worked. The moment she protested, the moment she pushed too hard, that's when things got dangerous. Knox tapped his fingers against the door, staring at her like he was trying to figure her out. Then he took it a step further. "You driving a rental?" he asked casually. Amara's lips barely moved. "Why does that matter?" Knox scoffed. "Just wondering how someone like you can afford a car like this." There it was. The mask came off. This wasn't about law enforcement, it never was. This was about power. About a cop who had never been challenged. A man who had spent years treating people like her as less than, because no one had ever stopped him. But tonight he picked the wrong person. Amara stayed calm. Because this wasn't the time to reveal who she was. Not yet, but one thing was certain: Knox was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. The night air felt heavier as Amara sat motionless, her hands still resting on the steering wheel. Officer Knox hadn't moved from her side, but his posture had changed. There was an energy to him now, the type of confidence that came from years of unchecked authority. He thought he was in control. He thought he had already won. Then, without a word, he reached for her door handle and opened it. Amara's breath was steady, but her pulse ticked higher. "Step out of the vehicle," Knox ordered, his voice carrying the weight of expectation, as if she would obey without question. As if she was supposed to. Amara didn't move. "Not yet. You don't have the right to search my car without a warrant," she said evenly. Knox grinned, a kind of grin that said he'd heard those words before, and they had never mattered. His hand hovered near his holster, not gripping it but close. "If you don't cooperate," he said, "I'll arrest you for resisting an officer." There it was, the threat. The unspoken warning. Amara had seen this play out too many times. She knew what came next. If she argued, if she stood her ground, Knox would escalate. And escalations got people killed. Slowly, deliberately, Amara unbuckled her seatbelt. Her movements were controlled, precise. Because in moments like this, even the smallest motion could be twisted into justification. Knox stepped back, still smirking, as she climbed out of the car. He thought he had won. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Amara felt it coming before it happened to shift. The moment when a cop like Knox decides that words aren't enough. The moment when power turns to force. "Hand over your bag," Knox demanded, his smirk tightening. Amara kept her expression neutral. "For what reason?" "I need to check it for drugs," he said casually, like he wasn't making a completely baseless accusation. She knew the law, knew exactly where the line was. And Knox, he had just crossed it. "You don't have a warrant," she said, her voice steady. "I don't have to obey." Knox's eyes flickered, a crack in the mask. The amusement was gone now. There was only frustration, because he wasn't used to being told no and he wasn't about to accept it. The shift was sudden. Violent. Before she could react, Knox grabbed her wrist and twisted. Pain shot up her arm as he wrenched it behind her back. A gasp escaped her lips, not from fear, but from sheer disbelief at his audacity. Then the snap of handcuffs locking into place. The cold metal bit into her skin. And just like that, Amara Lewis was under arrest. For nothing. A murmur spread through the air. Then voices. What the hell? She didn't do anything. People were watching. A woman across the street clutched her purse, eyes wide. A man stopped mid-step, frowning. Then the phones came out. Cameras recording. Truth being captured in real time. A young man near the curb stepped forward. "She did nothing wrong," he shouted. Why was she arrested? Knox didn't even glance at him. Didn't acknowledge the growing crowd. Didn't care. Because this wasn't about right or wrong. This wasn't about justice. This was about control. And Knox was making sure everyone knew who had it. The patrol car rumbled down the road, the red and blue lights flashing against the empty streets. Inside, Amara sat in the back seat, her wrists sore from the tight handcuffs. But her face calm, unshaken. Because she knew something Officer Knox didn't. This wasn't going to end the way he thought it would. Knox glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his smirk widening. "You'll like our prison," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. Amara didn't react, didn't look at him. She simply stared out the window, watching the city roll by. Because she wasn't thinking about prison. She was thinking about what came next. Knox, in all his arrogance, had no idea. But soon he would. In the front passenger seat, Officer Ryan Kim shifted uncomfortably. He had been quiet the entire ride, hands resting on his lap, his expression unreadable. But inside he was wrestling with something heavy. Because he had seen plenty of stops before. Had witnessed Knox pull this exact move on other people. But tonight felt different. Something about the way the woman in the back seat wasn't afraid. Something about the way she carried herself even in handcuffs. It made Kim's stomach twist. But he didn't say a word. Because cops like Knox thrived on silence. And Kim wasn't brave enough to break it. When they pulled into the station, Knox parked with a quick, confident jerk of the wheel. Then, without hesitation, he yanked the back door open. "Let's go," he said, gripping Amara's arm. She didn't resist. Didn't flinch. She simply stepped out. Straight back. Composed. Like she wasn't being treated like a criminal. Like she wasn't walking into a holding cell. Like she was walking into a place she was about to own. Knox still thought he was in control. He was seconds away from realizing the truth. The moment Amara Lewis stepped into the station, the energy shifted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows against the dull gray walls. Officers milled about handling paperwork, answering phones and processing the usual chaos of a night shift. But as soon as Knox marched her in, gripping her arm like he had just made the arrest of the jury, heads began to turn. Something felt off. Knox, chest puffed out with arrogance, barely noticed. He was still riding the high of his abusive power. Still believing he was untouchable. He led Amara toward the booking desk. But before he could speak, a firm voice cut through the room. "What's going on here?" Lieutenant Brian Reyes stepped forward. His crisp uniform and silver insignia immediately commanding respect. A seasoned officer, one who had seen everything. His sharp eyes flicked from Knox to Amara, reading the situation in seconds. Knox didn't hesitate. He doubled down. She was resisting an officer. He snapped his grip on Amara, tightening. Disobeyed orders. Refused a search. Reyes held up a hand. "Calm down, Knox," he said coolly. Then, turning his attention to Amara, he asked, "What's your name, ma'am?" A pause. The air felt charged. Amara could feel every officer in the room watching, waiting. She lifted her chin, her voice steady, unshaken. "I'm Amara Lewis." A beat of silence. Director of the Texas Department of Law Enforcement. The room went still, dead silent. 1 second. 2. Then the shift. Officers glanced at each other, eyes widening. Someone muttered, "Oh shit!" Rise blinked. Once. Twice. Then his face hardened. Knox's smirk vanished. His fingers unconsciously loosened around Amara's arm. Color drained from his face as realization set in slow, creeping, suffocating. He hadn't arrested just anyone. He had arrested his boss. And now his world was about to collapse. "Enough," Reyes cut him off, his voice sharp, filled with disgust. "You're suspended. Immediately." Silence. Knox's mouth hung open, his brain struggling to process. Suspended? No, this wasn't happening. He looked around, expecting anyone to defend him. But all he saw were averted eyes. Co-workers refusing to meet his gaze. The same officers who once laughed at his jokes, covered for him, turned a blind eye. Now they were standing back, because no one wanted to sync with him. "Escort him out," Reyes ordered. 2 officers moved in. Knox yanked his arm away. "I can walk on my own." But it didn't matter. Because as he stumbled toward the exit, past the quiet, judging stares of his fellow officers, he finally understood he wasn't one of them anymore. And his career? It was over. The downfall of Officer Knox didn't stop at the police station. It was just beginning. The video hit the internet before the ink on Knox's suspension was even dry. A teenager from across the street had recorded everything. The flashing lights. The way Knox yanked Amara from her car. The moment he twisted her arm and cuffed her like a criminal. And most importantly, Amara's name. Director of the Texas Department of Law Enforcement. Arrested. For nothing. The internet exploded. Justice for Amara, police abuse, accountability now. Thousands of comments flooded social media. She followed the law and they still arrested her. What does that tell you? This isn't one bad cop. This is a broken system. Knox didn't just mess up, he exposed everything wrong with modern policing. Within hours, major news networks picked up the story. Reporters dissected every second of the footage. The body cam footage was requested. The mayor's office was pressured to respond. And then, the real storm hit. They dug into Knox's past. And what they found, a pattern. Multiple complaints of racial profiling. Reports of excessive force, all dismissed. Wrongful arrests, falsified police reports, harassment. Knox hadn't just abused his power this once. He had been doing it for years. But now he wasn't protected anymore. The protests began the next day. People flooded the streets outside the Houston Police Department. Signs. Chants. Cameras everywhere. The demand was clear: fire Officer Knox. Hold the department accountable. Reform the system that allowed this to happen. Because this wasn't just about Amara Lewis. This was about every person Knox had victimized before her. And now the world was watching. Knox sat in the interrogation room. But this time he wasn't the one in control. The walls felt smaller. The air heavier. Across from him sat Lieutenant Reyes, stone-faced. And next to him Amara Lewis. Uncuffed. Calm. Unshaken. The woman he had arrested like a common criminal. Now sitting across from him as his judge. Reyes didn't waste time. With a controlled motion, he slid a thick file across the table. It hit the metal surface with a thud. Knox's stomach tightened. He knew what was inside. Reyes folded his hands. Here's a list of complaints against you throughout your career. A pause. Then Amara spoke. Her voice was measured. Precise. You have 2 choices, Officer Knox. She leaned forward slightly. 1, resign immediately. Her eyes never wavered. Or 2, be fired and placed under criminal investigation. Silence. Knox felt his pulse hammering. His career was burning down in front of him. He gritted his teeth. This isn't just me, he spat. The whole system works this way. I was just no. Reyes cut him off. Knox blinked. And that's when it hit him. No one was going to defend him. The same officers who had laughed at his jokes, covered for him, ignored the complaints. Now they weren't looking at him. because they knew Knox wasn't an officer anymore. He was a liability. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Knox reached for the pen. He scrawled his name on the resignation form. But resigning didn't mean he was free. Because outside this room, the district attorney was already reviewing his case. And Knox, he had just run out of places to hide. The cameras flashed. The room was packed. Amara Lewis stood behind the podium, facing not just reporters, but an entire nation waiting for answers. She had spent her life enforcing the law. Now she was here to change it. She gripped the edges of the podium, her voice steady, unwavering. The problem, she began, was never just one bad cop. Let the weight of them sink in. The problem is the system that allows men like him to exist. The system that protected him, that ignored complaints, that let abuse continue unchecked until it happened to the wrong person. A murmur rippled through the room. Amara pressed forward. I was lucky. I had power. I had a name. And even then I was arrested without cause. She paused, then looked directly at the cameras. How many others were lucky? Silence. Because everyone knew the answer. This cannot continue, she declared. And under my watch it won't. Then she laid out the plan. Establish an independent police oversight commission. A panel of civilians, legal experts, and law enforcement to investigate cases of abuse without department interference. Increase training on racial bias and professional ethics. Officers would be held to higher standards, real ones. Require all police officers to wear body cameras, with footage publicly accessible in cases of misconduct. This is not about punishing police, Amara said, her voice clear. This is about making sure the right people wear the badge. The room erupted into applause. By the next morning, the proposals had swept the nation. Activists rallied. Politicians weighed in. Police departments across the country felt the pressure because this case wasn't just another news cycle. This was a reckoning. Neckening. And Amara Lewis, she wasn't just a survivor of the system. She was the one who was going to fix it. The fallout from Amara Lewis's arrest didn't end with Knox. It was just the beginning. Because now people were watching. And the system was being forced to answer for itself. Accountability had begun. Knox had been exposed, but what about the others? Internal investigations were launched across multiple precincts. Old complaints resurfaced. Cases once buried were now under review. More officers were placed under scrutiny, facing disciplinary action or worse. This wasn't just about one cop. It was about a culture of unchecked power. And now that culture was breaking. A new generation of officers felt the shift. Some fought against it. But not Ryan Kim. The young officer who had sat in silence that night, had watched as Knox abused his badge, had seen the way Amara Lewis never lost her composure even when she had every right to. And Kim, he learned. For the first time, he saw what real strength looked like. And he made a decision. He wasn't going to be another Knox. He was going to be better. Restoring trust and justice. The community felt the shift. For so long, people had believed the system could never change. That corruption was too deep. That abuse was too protected. But Amara Lewis proved them wrong. Because for the first time, someone inside the system fought back and won. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. But now there was hope. And hope was the most dangerous thing of all. Because it meant change was possible. Final message, the big lesson from the story. The world had changed because one woman refused to stay silent. Amara Lewis didn't just expose one bad cop. She exposed the system that allowed him to exist. And because she fought back, everything shifted. This story raises a tough question. What if the person arrested hadn't held a high-ranking position? The message here is clear. Justice should never depend on status, but on truth and integrity. Everyone takes something different away from this story. What about you? What do you think is the root cause of why racism still exists? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us, when do you think the world will finally overcome racial discrimination? Maybe in 10 years, 50, or even longer, but every conversation we start today is a step toward a better tomorrow. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.